Hey guys, Gradysmom here with volume 7 of my cooking series. This recipe is for a mini meatball vegetable soup. So it's sort of a two-step process because we're going to have to make our meatballs first. And then we will prep all the veggies to go in, and we're going to boil the meatballs first in the chicken broth and then throw the veggies in after. So for this recipe, I'm going to use beef. You can use ground chicken or ground turkey and make meatballs with that instead. However, if you are going to use turkey or chicken, you're going to want to omit the egg because you're not going to need it because it's going to be too moist and they're going to fall apart. So since I'm using beef, I am going to use 1 egg. For the meatballs, again, you're going to use meat, an egg if you're using beef. If you're not using beef, then you won't need the egg. Some dried parsley, some Italian breadcrumbs. You can also use regular bread, just kind of ripped up into smaller pieces. And then I'm going to use some Parmesan cheese in the meatballs. So the first step in this process is making the meatballs, since that takes the longest. And then I'm going to get my chicken broth boiling to cook the meatballs in. So I have 2 32-ounce cartons of chicken broth. And for my vegetables, you can honestly use any combination that you like, but for this recipe I'm going to be using kale. I won't need this whole bag, but I will use a big portion of it. I'm going to use some sliced white mushrooms, some cherry tomatoes from my garden. I'm not going to chop these, I'm just going to throw them right in like this because they're going to burst on their own. I'm going to use 1 small zucchini, about half of this yellow or white cooking onion, about half this bag of English peas, and then I'm going to use these leeks here. And leeks need to be rinsed off, which I will show you guys how to do that. And so let me go ahead and set up my tripod and get started on making the meatballs first. Okay guys, so I have a bowl set up here, and then over here I have a plate set up to put the meatballs on when I am done rolling them. I'm going to start by getting my egg cracked into the bowl. I'm going to open up my meat. Get that into the bowl. This is a pound of ground beef. So the meat is in there. I'm going to give my hands a quick wash from touching the meat. I'm going to do some parsley. And then some breadcrumb. Did about half a cup. And I'm going to get the egg right in my hand and make sure that gets dissolved. You're definitely going to want to use your hands because the spoon won't quite combine everything the way that it needs to be combined. And this is a pretty basic meatball kind of recipe with the meat, the bread, the egg, and a little bit of seasoning. So I'm just kind of working it so that the egg is getting all mixed in with the meat. Doesn't take too long, but you're definitely going to want to use your hands. All right, I can tell I need more breadcrumb, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more and then do the same thing. You don't want them to be too wet and goopy because they're not going to hold their shape. And when you put them in the water to cook, or the broth to cook, they're just going to fall apart. So you want to make sure they are not too wet or too moist. There's sort of a fine line between being too moist and being too dry. So that looks good when it stays together like that and doesn't just fall apart. So I'm going to start by making my meatballs. I'm just going to roll them. Now we want them to be mini meatballs. I don't want them big. So hopefully you guys can gauge by my hand. I do have pretty large hands, not fat large, but just bigger hands. So that is sort of the size. So if this helps, definitely you're going to want it to be smaller than a donut hole. Or like a donut munchkin, I think that's what they're called. So this is like the size you're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and do another one. And then I'm going to finish the rest off camera, but I will show you. Here's another one, guys, the plate of them before I go ahead and put them all into the broth. So meanwhile, in back of me, I have a big pot going with those 2 cartons of broth that I showed you, and that I'm bringing that to a boil so that I can put these in there when I am done with this. So that is all I'm doing right now. I'm going to finish these meatballs right now and then show you what they look like. Okay guys, so my meatballs are all rolled. Again, they are very mini. It's always hard to tell on camera how large or small something is, but they are very mini, definitely bite-sized, sort of poppable in your mouth. And I have my broth, the 2 cartons of chicken broth, that is just starting to come to a simmer right now. So I'm going to go ahead and let me set up my tripod. Go ahead and get my meatballs right into this boiling broth. Just going to drop them right in. It's kind of 2 or 3 at a time. And they are going to cook up nicely in this broth. And because they are small, they are not going to take a long time to cook. I'm just kind of lightly dropping them in. Again, if they're too moist, they're going to fall right apart and they're not going to stay in this little meatball form. So that's why, like I said, if you're using ground turkey or ground chicken, which would be just as delicious, you're not going to need that egg. So there we go. They are all in. So I am going to let those do their thing, and in the meantime, I'm going to get my veggies going, so I'll show you guys that. Okay, so my meatballs are simmering away. The tomatoes, I don't need to do anything to, except maybe just give them a quick rinse because they are going in whole. Same thing on the peas, don't need to do anything to them. The mushrooms are sliced, but I am actually going to slice them down a little bit further because this just, in my opinion, is a little bit too big, something like that, for what I want as far as size. So I'm going to grab my knife and I'm just going to get, I'm not going to use all of these mushrooms, but I'm just going to get them cut down a little bit, the big ones. Probably going to use roughly about half of this container, which is not a huge container, so I just like to kind of stack them up and then just cut them sort of in thirds. So that looks, maybe one more big one. That looks about the right amount right there, guys. Hopefully you can see that pile. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab a clean plate so I can put all of my prepped veggies on one big plate so that it's just easier to pour them into the pot. So mushrooms are good to go now. The kale, same thing. I don't have to do anything to the kale. Okay, let me get my zucchini here. Just going to cut the top and the bottom off and kind of eyeball it and see if there's any like major imperfections. There's a little brown area there, so I'm going to cut that off. Other than that, it looks pretty good. So I'm going to cut, I like to stand them up. I'm going to just cut down this way and cut it kind of in thirds. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. The main thing is you just want it to be, the pieces to be around the same size. That's the only thing as far as prepping veggies, is you want to just try and make sure they're around the same size. You don't want huge pieces and then a bunch of small pieces, just because it cooks more evenly if they're all around the same size. So this one I can just cut in half. And I'm only using one zucchini. I don't want any one particular vegetable to overshadow another one. Just kind of want it to all be equal. So there are the veggies. Or the zucchini. So I'm going to put that on my plate. All right, so now I'm going to get these leeks ready to get rinsed and soaked because they have sand in them. So let me show you how I do that. Okay, so here are the leeks. A lot of people don't use leeks because they might not know about them, or they're just not really that common. But I really like to use them. I don't always buy them because I don't remember to, or sometimes I just don't even see them. But they have a very subtle sort of oniony, scalliony flavor. And I just trimmed off the ends, the little end pieces like that. And I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna slice these, and then I have a bowl right here that I'm gonna put them in because we wanna let them soak in some water because leeks are filled with sand. Even just tiny little granules that you can't always see. But you definitely want to soak leeks because if you don't soak them and you just use them, you're going to be sorry because there will be grit and sand in your dish. Just got this last piece cut. So I'm going to try to separate them a little bit and get them into this bowl that I had waiting. So they look like that. And I'm gonna go ahead and get some cold water. Just like that, you guys can see, and they're just gonna kind of soak, and all that grit and sand, even the stuff that's too small to see with the naked eye, is going to get out of there, and then we'll just let them kind of do their thing for a few minutes. So I'm just gonna set this aside so that can get clean because you wanna get that grit out. And I think I'm actually going to use only about 1/4 of this onion, because of the fact that the leeks are oniony-ish as well, and I don't want this to be an onion soup. So I am still gonna use a little bit of the onion, but I'm not gonna use half of this like I originally thought. I think I'm only gonna use more like that much. So let's call it 1/4. So I'm just gonna peel the skin off like this, set that aside, and just get this chopped up pretty fine. Like that. This can join the plate. And everything else is already prepped because all the other veggies we were using. Let me see. So we've got this. Peas go in like that. Tomatoes go in like that. I gotta put those mushrooms away. Leeks are soaking. And that kale is already washed and ready to go. Let's go ahead and check on the meatballs. Let's see here, I'm gonna grab a spoon. They're bubbling away. I'm gonna go ahead and give them a little stir. I can't get too close, I don't want my lens to fog up. But they're already turning a nice brown color. So these, I had set the timer, guys, for 15 minutes to let them cook in the broth. Got about 6 minutes left to go. So I'm just gonna let them keep doing their thing. And I'm going to go ahead and get all the veggies thrown in there in about 6 more minutes. Okay guys, so the meatballs have been in there for 15 minutes, which is what I want the timer on. So I'm gonna go ahead and get some of these veggies right into the pot off of my plates. And obviously the veggies are gonna cook down a lot because it's gonna look like a lot to begin with. So let me go ahead and get the rest of the veggies and get them in the pot, and I'll show you what it looks like before I put a lid on it. Okay, so I have some more veggies here. Now we aren't gonna add the kale until the end because the kale will just wilt down and become mush. So I'm just gonna add everything but the kale. And move the camera here a little closer. And then we have all the veggies in there with the meatballs now in the broth. I can't get too close, so I'm just gonna stir this all up. I'm gonna turn the heat down to a little bit higher than low, but not quite medium, so between low and medium. Put the lid on it and let this do its thing for about a good hour. So I'm going to turn the heat right here if you can see, so it's sort of between low and medium. I'm going to go ahead and get the lid on this for about an hour. I'll probably stir it halfway through, and then I'll show you when to add the kale and how we finish everything off. Okay guys, so a little over an hour has gone by and everything is cooked down really nicely, and the soup has thickened up a little bit because everything, like I said, has cooked down. So now I'm going to go ahead now and add in the kale. So let me go ahead and grab the kale, set up my tripod, and I'm going to throw that in. Okay, so I turned the heat down just a little bit, and I have my bag of kale here. I'm going to go ahead and throw in a couple heaping handfuls, and this is going to look like a lot of kale, but it is really not. It's going to wilt down to very, very little compared to now. So I just have that sitting on top. I'm going to sort of fold it in. The tomatoes have just very delicately bursted, so they're going to be, they've sort of wilted a little bit, like to the point where if you just touch them, they'll burst. I love that. So I'm going to incorporate the kale in. And I actually think I'm going to turn my heat up and bring this to a boil really quick, which should happen pretty quickly. And the reason we don't add the kale again in the beginning is that it'll just lose its color, it'll turn to mush, and you want it to maintain a little bit of that crispness. So that looks pretty well stirred in. So now, I think I'm going to add a little bit of just black pepper, just a little bit. I'm not going to add salt because the broth has natural salt in it. And also, I forgot to mention, when I was making the meatballs, I forgot to add the Parmesan cheese into the meatball mixture, which is no big deal, because now when I plate this up, I am going to put a little Parm cheese on top. So it's just starting to bubble, and I don't want to get too close because my lens will fog up. But look how good this looks, guys. The kale's going to wilt down really nice. And it's just really nice with all the hearty vegetables and the meatballs, and it just smells really good. So I'm just going to top this off with some Parm cheese. So I'm just going to let this bubble away for just a few minutes, just under 5 minutes, and then I'm going to plate it up and show you how good it looks. I'm also going to top it with the Parmesan cheese then. Okay guys, so just a few minutes have gone by and we are good to go. Wanted to add a few little tips. If you are making this vegetarian without the meat, you could throw in some beans for protein. You could use cannellini beans, you could use kidney beans. Pretty much any bean will add the protein if you're not using meat. If you wanted to make this a little bit thicker or heartier, you could throw in some rice, you could throw in some orzo, you could throw in some pasta, like a Ditalini would be really nice. But my tip is, if you're going to use pasta in this, to boil the pasta separately in just a small pot, because although you can cook the pasta right in the broth, it will get mushy a lot quicker, and it will also soak up a lot of the broth. So I would do the pasta on the side and add it. I would just plate it up in bowls and then add the pasta to the bowls. So I'm going to go ahead now and get a nice bowl of this. Put a little cheese on top. This is a really, really great soup for a chilly day as well. So that looks really good. Just gonna put it on a little mat. So here is my bowl. I'm gonna go ahead and get some cheese on it. Gonna shake some cheese right on top. Again, I didn't add the cheese in the meatball, so it's fine to add a little bit on top. So there it is. It's going to be really delicious and hearty. Can't wait to dig in. I love the meatballs, how they're really small and they don't overwhelm the soup at all. Super pretty and perfect for a fall or winter night. And it just, I really love all the colors and all the different textures, and that kale is just perfect at the end. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a great day, and I will talk to you all very soon. Bye guys.